The coppers in the warming house ran hot from the third bell to the last, and it was my work to keep them so. That was the whole of me. The year I was 17, the girl who fed the fires under the great copper vats where the brood keeps linen boiled, and who carried the steam in her hair and her sleeves, and the creases of her hands until she smelled of lye and hot iron even in her sleep. Marrowstone Keep stood above us on its black shoulder of rock, and the town of Cinderlow lay below it in the valley smoke, and the warming house sat between the two like a held breath, half buried in the hill, its high windows louvered to let the steam climb out into the daylight. I have been in grander rooms since. I have stood in places I had no business standing. But I have never again felt as certain of my place in the world as I did down there among the coppers, where the only thing anyone asked of me was that the water stay hot and the fires never die. I should tell you what the keep was, so you understand the size of what I'm about to say. Marrowstone was a dragon house, not the way the old tailies mean it, with a single beast on a hoard in a mountain, a whole court of them, a brood line, the coal court of House Velmera, who had held that Black Hill since before Cinderlow had a name. They were not the dragons of the painted plates the peddlers sold in the valley, all gold and grin. They were vast and quiet and ancient, scaled in colors that the daylight had to work to find deep slate, banked ember, the dull bruise of old copper. When one of them passed over the warming house roof, the louvers shivered and the steam lay down flat for a moment, and I learned to feel them coming the way you feel weather. They did not speak to us. They had no reason to. We laundered for them and fed their fires and dug their middens, and in return Cinderlow was let to live in the smoke of a hill no raider would ever come near, and that was the bargain, and it had held for longer than anyone could count. At the top of all of it was the Coal Queen. Her name was Ussold, though I'd never have dared to use it, and even the keep folk who served her closely said it low. She was the brood mother of the whole line, the one from whom the court's blood ran, and she was so old and so large that I had only ever seen her twice in 3 years, both times as a darkness moving behind the high arrow slits of the brood hall, a shifting of shadow too big to be anything else. Her eyes, they said, were the color of a fire that has been burning so long it has gone past orange into a deep and steady red, and when she fixed them on you, you felt counted. That was the word they used, counted, as though her looking at you put you down in a ledger somewhere on the side of the living or the side of the not. I tell you about the counting, because the counting is where my story starts. The coal court kept its blood the way a kingdom keeps its line, carefully, and with ceremony, and with a fear of the gaps. A brood queen of Ussold's age laid rarely, and each clutch she laid was a matter of the whole court's attention, because the line was thinning. There were fewer true-blood drakes in the hall every decade. So when the queen laid, the eggs were brought down from her high chamber in a warmed cradle of ash and carried to the brood hall to be read, and the reckoner read them. The reckoner was a dragon too, a lean ash-gray drake named Dreven, old but not queen old, with a long sharp face and a way of holding very still. His work was the oldest and most honored in the court below the queen herself. He listened to the eggs. He would lower that long head until his jaw nearly touched the shell, and he would close his eyes, and he would listen for the heart. A quick egg has a heart you can hear, if you are a dragon and you know how, a small steady knocking down inside the warm. A still egg has nothing, and Dreven's word on which was law because the court could not afford to waste its warmth and its hope and its nomming rights on shells that would never open. If Dreven said an egg was quick, it went up to the queen's chamber to be brooded. If Dreven said an egg was still, it went down to us. That was the part the court never thought about, I think. What happened to the still ones? They came down to the warming house to be unmade, the shell broken and burned in the coppers under fire, the way you'd burn anything you wanted gone cleanly. It was not cruelty. It was tidiness. A dead egg is a dead egg, and you do not keep it. They sent the still ones down to me because the warming house had the hottest fires in the keep, and because no one of any rank wanted to carry a failed thing back up the stairs. I had burned 11 of them in my 3 years. I remember the number because I counted, even though no one asked me to. It seemed to me that someone ought to. The 12th came down on the coldest morning of the winter. I was 17, in the arms of a keep boy named Toller, who was even lower than me, which was a thing I was not proud of minding. He set the cradle on my sorting bench and stamped the snow off his feet and said the reckoner had read the new clutch in the night, and there'd been one still in it, and here it was, and would I see to it, and he was gone back up into the cold before I'd even lifted the cloth. There were two things about that egg. The first was that it was small. The queen's eggs were the size of a curled child, big enough that a grown man carried one in both arms with a grunt. This one I could have held in the crook of one elbow. It was the runt of the clutch, the last and least, the kind of egg that even in a good year a brood mother might quietly let go cold on her own, and that, the keep folk would have told you, was why it had come back still. The small ones rarely had the heart. Drevin had read it and Drevin had heard nothing, and Drevin was never wrong, and so it had come down to be burned, and that was the whole of its story, and there was nothing in it. The second thing was that it was warm. Not keep warm, the way a thing is warm when it's been carried through a cold morning by a boy who held it against his chest, warm from the inside. I had handled 11 still eggs, and I knew the particular cold of them, a heavy, settled mineral cold, the cold of a stone that has given up. This one did not have it. When I lifted it out of the ash cradle and held it against the front of me to free my hands, it lay against my apron with a faint, stubborn heat of its own, like a loaf 2 hours out of the oven that has not quite let go. I told myself it was the cradle. They'd brooded the clutch warm before the reading, and the ash held heat, and the small ones cooled slowest because they sat deepest in the cradle's middle. I told myself all of that, and I was probably right, and I carried the egg to the under fire to burn it the way I'd burned 11 before it. And I stood there with it in my arms, and I could not do it. I have tried in the years since to make that moment into something it wasn't. I have wanted it to be a vision, a knowing, a hand on my shoulder from somewhere, anything that would make me clever or chosen rather than only stubborn. But the truth is plainer than that, and worse and better. I stood at the mouth of the under fire with a small warm weight against my chest, and I thought, I do not want to put a warm thing into a fire. That was all. It was not faith. It was not wisdom. It was the same thing in me that made me count the 11 I'd burned when no one asked. A thing that did not like to waste a warmth, even a warmth that the whole court above me had already decided was nothing. So I didn't burn it. I had a place behind the third copper where the brick of the flue ran up the wall, and the brick there was always hot, hot enough to dry a sleeve on, never hot enough to scorch. I'd kept my own bread there on cold mornings to thaw it. I made a nest of an old rolled blanket, and I set the egg into the curve of the warm brick, and I banked an apron of cloth over it to hold the heat, and I told myself I would burn it tomorrow. I had decided nothing. I was only putting off a small, ugly task on a cold day, which is a thing anyone might do, and if the egg was cold by morning, settled into that mineral stillness, I would carry it to the under fire and be done and never think of it again. It was not cold by morning. I want to be careful here, because what I'm telling you is the part the court could never quite believe afterward, and I have learned to tell it slowly. The egg was not cold the next morning, and it was not cold the morning after, and on the third morning, kneeling beside it before the third bell with my ear close the way I'd seen the reckoner hold his great head close. Though I am not a dragon and could hear nothing a dragon hears, I felt against my cheek, through the shell, the faintest knock. Not heard, felt, a small steady knocking. Deep down inside the warm, like a knuckle on a far door. I knelt there a long time. I was a laundry girl. I knew nothing of eggs but how to burn them. But I knew what a heartbeat was because I had one, and I knew that the reckoner had said this egg had none, and I knew that the reckoner was never wrong, and I knelt there in the steam with my heart going and the eggs going under my cheek, and I understood that one of those two things, the reckoner's word, or the knock under my cheek, was a lie, and that I had no power in the whole world to decide which. So I did the only thing a girl in my place could do, which was nothing and everything. I said nothing to anyone, and I kept it warm. That is the start. The middle is longer and harder, and I'll tell it as it came. A winter is a long time to keep a secret in a warming house, where keep folk came and went all day with their baskets, and where Toller might be sent down at any hour with another cradle. I learned to be a different girl on the days I was watched. I moved the egg deeper behind the third copper, into a dead corner where the flue brick made a kind of alcove, and I built up the rolled blanket and the apron into something that looked, to a passing eye, like a heap of rags drying. I tended it on my knees before the third bell and after the last in the gray edges of the day when the warming house was mine. I turned it the way I'd seen a hen turn an egg in the valley, gently, a quarter turn, twice a day, because it seemed right and I had no one to tell me otherwise. And I listened, cheek to shell, for the knock, and the knock came stronger as the winter deepened, which is backward, which is the wrong way round, because a winter is when warm things die. It did not die. It was warming itself. I came to understand that slowly over those weeks, that whatever was inside the shell was not merely holding the heat I gave it but making its own, more of it as it grew, until by the deep of the winter the brick alcove behind the third copper was the warmest corner of a very warm room, and I no longer had to bank the apron over the egg at all. It lay bare on its blanket and it glowed faintly to the touch, and when I pressed my palm flat to the shell I could feel the heat pulse, in time with the knock, a small drum of warmth. I did not know what I had. I want to be honest about that. I have heard the story told since, in ways that make me wise, make me a girl who knew she cradled a king. I knew nothing of the kind. I thought on my clearest days that I had found a single egg the reckoner had misjudged, one small life out of a clutch, and that the whole of my secret was that I had saved a runt the court would have burned. That was already more than a laundry girl had any right to. The rest of it, the size of the rest of it, I did not so much as dream. It hatched on the night the valley froze hardest, the night they later called the Black Frost, when even the keep's high fires were said to have struggled, and 3 of Cinderlow's old folk died in their beds of the cold. I was awake because the cold had reached even the warming house, and I'd come down in the dark to feed the under fire and found, when I knelt by the third copper out of habit, that the shell had a crack in it. Not a break, a crack, a fine dark line running the length of the warm copper-dark shell, and along the line a wet gleam and a sound. The egg was making a sound, a thin, exhausted, scraping sound, on and on, the sound of something very small using the very last of itself to get out of a room it had outgrown. I have heard men talk of battles since, and great deeds, and I have never heard anything that frightened me the way that small scraping did, because I understood all at once that the thing inside could die there, in the last inch of its first task, with the door of its own shell half open, that I had kept it warm all winter only to watch it fail at the threshold, and that I did not know how to help and might do harm if I tried. I knelt and I did the only thing I knew, which was to be warm. I cupped my hands around the cracked shell so my own heat went into it, and I put my face down close and I talked to it. I don't remember the words. There were no words worth remembering, only the low going-on murmur you'd give a frightened animal or a sick child, the noise that means I'm here, keep on. And the scraping went on, and weakened, and I thought I'd lost it, and then with a small wet tearing the shell came open along its line, and a thing fell out into my hands that I will carry behind my eyes until I die. It was a dragon. There was never any doubt of that, not for a heartbeat. It was scaled, wet dark and gleaming, a small body no bigger than a kitten with a long neck folded back on itself, and a tail curled tight and 2 crumpled wing buds slick against its sides, and a long delicate skull with the eyes still sealed, and small soft claws that opened and closed on nothing. It was draconic to the bone, an old and serious shape made tiny, and the moment I saw it I understood why the court's tailies never made dragons cute. There was nothing cute in it. There was something ancient looking out of a new body, even with the eyes still shut. And it was wrong. I saw that too in the first moment, and I want to tell it plainly because it matters to everything after. One wing bud was crimped, folded the wrong way at the joint, a small cruel kink in the new bone that would not come straight no matter how the creature stretched. And when its eyes did open, a day later one was clear and dark and burning faintly like all its kind, and the other was clouded over pale, a blind milk-white, fixed and sightless. It was small even for the run of a clutch. Its breath scraped. Its heart, that I had felt knocking all winter, knocked too fast and too loud, a heart working harder than it should to keep so small a body going. It was, by every measure the court above me used, a failed thing, a runt of a runt, malformed, the kind of hatchling that even a brood mother, even a queen, might look on once and turn away from because the line was thinning and the line could not be spent on the broken. I knew that. I had lived 3 years in the smoke of that hill, and I knew exactly how the court counted. And I knew that if I'd carried that small, wrong-winged, blind-eyed creature up the black stairs and laid it before the brood hall, the kindest word it would have been given was the one Dreven had already given its egg. Still, so I did not carry it up. I kept it, the way I'd kept the egg, only now there was no pretending it was a heap of rags. Now it was a living thing that breathed and cried, a thin, reedy cry like a kettle just off the boil, and ate and grew, and had to be hidden every hour of every day in a room that strangers walked through. I will not pretend the next weeks were anything but terror laid over wonder. I stole for it. I am not ashamed to say so now, though I was then. A hatchling that warm and growing that fast needed feeding, and what it needed was meat and milk, and the bone broth the keep kitchens boiled for the court's own young, and a laundry girl has no claim on any of that. So I took what I could, the trimmings the kitchen threw to the midden, the skin off the broth, my own ration of the keep's hard bread softened in hot copper water, and I gave the best of it to the small dark thing behind the third copper, and I went thinner that winter than I'd ever been, and I told no one why. I named it in my own head because I could not go on calling it the egg. I called it Knock, for the sound under my cheek that had told me it was alive when the wisest dragon in the keep had said it wasn't. It was not a name a dragon would have. I knew that the court's drakes had long rolling names that took a dragon's throat to say properly. But I was not a court. I was a laundry girl, and Knock was what I had, and it was honest, and the small creature came to know it. That was the thing that undid me in the end, that it came to know me. It could not see well, with the one clouded eye, but it knew my step on the warming house floor, and it knew my voice. And when I came down in the gray before the third bell, it would lift that long, delicate head from the blanket and turn the good eye toward my coming and make a sound that was not the kettle cry, a low, warm churring deep in its chest, and stretch out its small, wrong wings toward me, and I would kneel down and let it climb into the front of my apron the way it had lain there as an egg. And it would tuck that long neck under my chin and churr, and go warm and heavy against me, and I would have walked into the under fire myself before I let any harm come to it. That is what they could never quite understand after the court, the keep folk, the reckoner, even the queen. They thought the marvel of the story was that the egg had lived when it was red dead. They thought the marvel was in the egg, but the marvel was never the egg. The marvel was the churring. The marvel was that a thing so old and so serious, a thing built to be vast and feared, had decided in its first weeks of life that a laundry girl who smelled of lye was warmth and safety and home, and had told her so in the only voice it had, every gray morning, all that long winter. I could not hide it forever. I knew that even while I was doing it, it grew slowly, more slowly than a true-bred hatchling would have, the crimped wing and the loud heart holding it back, but it grew, and a dragon, even a small wrong one, does not stay kitten-sized. By the turn of the year, it was the size of a herding dog and could no longer be passed off as rags or shadow, and it had begun to want to follow me, dragging itself across the warming house floor on its small claws and one good wing with a stubborn determination that broke my heart, because the crimped wing would not bear it, and it could not yet fly, and it wanted so badly to come where I was. I started keeping the warming house door barred when keep folk were due. I started inventing reasons for the sounds. I started, I think, to go a little mad with the carefulness of it. the way you do when you are 17, and carrying a secret bigger than your whole life with no one in the world to share the weight. And the Count found me anyway, because the Count always does. It was the reckoner who found it. Of course it was. I have thought since that it could only ever have been Dreven, that the same ear that could hear a heart through a shell could hear, sooner or later, a heart it had pronounced dead still knocking away in a warming house it had no reason ever to enter. He came on an afternoon in the thaw, when the louvers were open to a wet bright daylight, and the steam climbed out into a sky going pale blue for the first time in months. I felt him before I saw him, the louvers shivering, the steam lying flat, the particular heavy hush of a great dragon close. And then his long ash-gray head was in the high doorway of the warming house, filling it, the sharp face lowered, the deep eyes finding me at the third copper, and then finding behind me the small dark shape that had lifted its head at the strangers coming and gone still. I will not pretend I was brave. I stood between the reckoner and the hatchling because my body did it before my mind could weigh the foolishness, and I held out my lye-stained hands as though a girl's two hands could stop anything that house contained, and I said, I remember this, because it was the only true thing I had. Its heart was always going. I felt it. You said it was still, and it was never still. Dreven did not strike me. Dreven did not speak, not at first. He lowered that great sharp head past me, slow, the way I'd seen him lower it to an egg, and he brought his jaw close to the small dark shape behind me, and he closed his eyes and he listened. The warming house was very quiet. The coppers ticked. The steam climbed. The hatchling Knock looked up at the vast gray head bent over it with the one good eye burning faint, and did not cry and did not flee. It chirred. That low warm sound, the home sound, the sound it made for me. It made it for the reckoner because the reckoner was a dragon, and it was a dragon, and it had spent its whole short life starved for the sight of its own kind, and it did not know that this was the one who had counted it dead. It only knew that here, at last, was someone the size of the shadows it must have dreamed of, bending close to listen to its heart. I watched the reckoner's face while it chirred at him. I am not wise about dragons, but I have a laundry girl's eye for the small tells of a face bent over close work, and I saw something move through that long ash-gray face that I had no name for then and have only one name for now. It was grief. The reckoner lifted his head and looked at me, and for a moment the never-wrong reckoner of the coal court of house, Velmera, looked at a 17-year-old laundry girl as though she had caught him in the one mistake of his long life, which she had, and he said, in a voice like coals shifting, the first words any dragon of that keep had ever spoken to me. I did not hear it. No, I said, my voice shook. You didn't. It was the smallest, he said, and it was not an excuse, it was a confession, an old creature laying down a thing he had carried up the stairs. It was the smallest, and the smallest are still, and I have read 400 clutches, and the smallest have always been still. He looked down at Knock again, at the crimped wing and the clouded eye and the loud, brave heart, and he said lower, I listened for the heart I expected. I did not listen for the heart that was there. I have turned that sentence over more times than any other in my life. I have come to think it is the truest thing anyone said in the whole of what happened, truer than anything the Queen said later, for all her grandeur. I listened for the heart I expected. The reckoner had not been cruel, and he had not been careless. He had been certain. And his certainty had been a door he closed before the Knock could reach him, and only a girl too low to know the egg was supposed to be dead had been willing to keep her ear against the wood. I thought in that moment that he would take Knock from me. He had the right. The hatchling was the Queen's blood, the court's to keep or unmake, and I was a thief who'd hidden it half a year. I braced for it. He did not take it. He looked at me a long time, and then he said a thing that frightened me more than any threat. The Queen must see this. The Queen. I want to slow down here, at the end, because the end is the part the tailies get wrong, and I would rather you heard it right from me than grand from someone who wasn't there. They did not drag me up the black stairs. That is the first thing the tailies get wrong. I had imagined in my worst nights being hauled before the brood hall, The whole court ranked along its great walls, the queen a darkness behind her arrow slits, and a laundry girl made small in the middle of all that stone to answer for what she'd done. It was not like that. The reckoner went up alone, and a day passed, and I sat in the warming house with knock heavy and warm in my lap, and the bar across the door, and no idea in the world whether I would see another thaw. And I held the small wrong-winged creature, and I told it, over and over, the only thing I had left to give it, which was that I was glad. Whatever came, I was glad I had not burned it. I would say that to the under fire itself if they made me. And then on the second morning the louvers shivered, and the steam lay down flat, and it did not get up again, and the daylight in the high windows went dark, not with cloud, with bulk, and I understood that the thing too large to come up the stairs to me had instead come down the hill to where I was. The coal queen did not enter the warming house. She could not have. No door in it would have taken a tenth of her. The whole far wall of the warming house was the old louvered bay where the steam climbed out into the daylight, and the louvers had been folded back for the thaw, and into that wide, bright opening, blotting out the pale blue sky, came the head of the queen. I had seen her twice as a shadow behind stone. I had never seen her in the day. Nothing in 3 years of living in the smoke of her hill had readied me for the size of her in the daylight, a head longer than the longest copper bench, scaled in a deep banked red that the morning found and woke slow into 1,000 shifting points of fire along every plate and ridge, horns swept back like the bones of some great burned ship, and the eyes. They told true about the eyes. They were the color of a fire that has burned so long it has gone past orange into a deep steady red, and they were old past any counting I could do, and they came to rest on me where I knelt by the third copper, and I felt myself counted. I could not speak. I could not kneel lower than I already was. I knelt with Knock in my lap, the small dark creature gone utterly still, the way it never went still, its one good eye fixed up at the vast red head in the window, and I waited to be unmade. The queen looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at the thing in my lap, and a sound came out of her that I felt in the floor and the coppers and the bones of my chest, a low rolling rumble that I thought at first was rage. And Knock, small broken Knock, who had spent its whole life knowing only one warm thing and one warm voice, lifted its long, delicate neck out of my lap toward that enormous burning face, and answered her. It churred. The home sound, the morning sound, the sound it made for me, for the reckoner, for warmth and safety and being known. It made it for the coal queen of House Velmera. Up into the red ruin of her ancient face, because it did not know to be afraid of her, because no one had ever taught it that it was supposed to be dead. And the great rumble in the queen's chest broke, and changed, and became, I have no better word, I have looked for years for a better word, it became an answering. A vast low churring, the home sound made enormous, the home sound made by a throat the size of a doorway, rolling out over the coppers and the steam and the small dark creature stretching up toward her with its wrong wings spread. The queen was answering her own blood. The thing the court had counted out of the line was calling to the broodmother in the one voice they shared, and the broodmother was calling back. I learned the rest in pieces after from the reckoner, who became, in the strange years that followed, something close to a friend. The clutch that Knock had come from had been the queen's last. She was old past laying again. The court had known it. That clutch had been the line's whole hope, and the line was thin, and of the eggs the reckoner read that night, the larger ones had quickened and gone up to brood. But they had been the queen's eggs by an aging mate, and dragons know their own blood the way we cannot, and not one of those larger quick eggs had carried the true deep fire of the brood line. The line was going to end in strong, hollow airs. The court had known that too, and had not spoken of it, the way you don't speak of a death in the house. And the smallest egg, the runt, the still one, the one Drevin had heard nothing in and sent down to be burned, had been the only one of the clutch to carry it. The true fire, the deep blood. It had been small and slow and crooked because the deep fire is hard to carry and costs the body that carries it, and it had hidden its heart down so deep, and so quiet that the wisest ear in the court, listening for the heart it expected, had not found it. The court's whole hope had come down the black stairs in a cradle to be tidied away, and a laundry girl who did not like to waste a warmth had set it against a warm brick instead of a fire. And that small, stubborn nothing of a choice was the whole reason the coal court of House Velmera had a line at all. They came for the nomming a fortnight later, when Knock was strong enough to be carried up. And here is the last thing the tailies get wrong, the thing I hold closest. The nomming of a true-blood heir was the oldest and grandest rite the court had. It was held in the brood hall, in the dark and the smoke, with the whole court ranked along the walls and the queen at the head, and it was the one place in all the world a laundry girl would never be let stand. The queen held it in the warming house. She sent word down through the reckoner, who delivered it standing in the louvered bay with the steam climbing past his ash-gray face into the daylight, that the rite would be held where the heir had lived, not in the brood hall, in the warming house, in the daylight, among the coppers, in the warm, bright room where the deep fire of her line had been kept alive through a winter by a girl with lye on her hands. The court did not understand it. The reckoner told me dry that some of them objected that it was not done, that a true-blood nomming below the hill in a laundry was a thing without precedent. And the queen had answered them, he said, with one sentence, which he gave me word for word because he knew I would want it, and I have kept it the way you keep the one letter that matters. The hall did not keep him warm. So they came down the hill into the daylight, the great dragons of the coal court, and they ranged themselves in the wide, bright space outside the louvered bay where the steam climbed, and the warming house had never in its life been so full of fire and shadow and the deep, slow breathing of ancient things. And in the middle of it, on the warm brick floor by the third copper where I had set an egg one cold morning rather than burn it, the coal queen named her heir. I will not tell you the name. It was a long, rolling thing that took her throat to say properly, the kind of name I had always known Knock would have and never be able to give itself, and it filled the warming house and went out through the louvers into the daylight, and I felt it in my chest like the deep churring. It was a name fit for a king of the line. It was nothing like Knock. But the queen did one thing more before she let the name stand, and it is the thing I was given, the thing that is mine, the thing I have carried out of that warming house into the whole long rest of my life. She turned her vast red head from her heir to me, where I stood small among all that fire, and she lowered it slow, the way the reckoner had lowered his to listen, the way you lower yourself to a thing you mean to honor, until that ancient burning face was level with mine, near enough that the heat of her came off her scales like the heat off the coppers, near enough that I could have laid my lye-stained hand flat on the bridge of her nose. And she breathed. A long, warm breath, deep from inside her, the warmest thing I have ever felt, washing over me where I stood, the breath she had not been able to give the egg through a winter, and a girl had given instead. And she spoke the only words she ever spoke to me, in that voice like the whole hill turning over in its sleep. You are warmthkin to my blood. While the line holds, there is a place at its hearth that is yours, and a name on it that is yours, and no one of my court will ever count you out of it. That was all. She did not kneel to me. I have heard the tale told that way. The queen knelt, the whole court knelt, the laundry girl raised up over the dragons, and it is a lie and a smaller thing than the truth, and it makes me tired. The coal queen of House Velmera did not kneel to a laundry girl. She did something far greater and far quieter. She bent her ancient head down to the level of mine in the daylight, and she gave me her warmth, and she said that I would never again be a thing the court could count out. And then she took her heir up the hill to be a king, and left me in the warming house with the steam and the coppers and the long bright rest of an ordinary day. Knock, I still call him Knock in my own head on the gray mornings. I am old now and entitled to my own names, for things grew into the deep fire of his line, crimped wing and clouded eye and all. They never came right. He never flew far or saw clearly. But the deep blood does not care for straight wings, and the line held and holds yet, and runs now through young drakes who have his loud, brave heart and have never once been read as still. Because the reckoner, until the day his own long life closed, listened to every egg twice, once for the heart he expected, and once with his eyes shut and his sharp old face bent low and patient, for the heart that was only there. I kept feeding the fires under the coppers. People find that strange. They think the warmthkin of a king's line ought to have gone up the hill to live in stone and be served. I went up sometimes. There was a place at the hearth, and it was mine, and I sat in it. But the warming house was where the warmth was, the true warmth, the kind you make with your own hands and your own care for a thing the whole world has already decided is nothing. And I have come to think that was the whole of what I ever had to teach the great house above me, and that I taught it best by staying down among the coppers and keeping them hot. A still egg is a dead egg, and you do not keep it. The whole court knew that. The wisest dragon in the keep knew it. I did not know it, because no one had ever bothered to teach a laundry girl what was worth saving and what was not, and so I saved it. And on the cold mornings, even now, even old, I go down to the third copper and I kneel by the warm brick where I once set a small warm weight rather than burn it, and I put my hand flat to the bricks, and I feel the heat of the fire I have kept going under them all my life, knocking faintly, going on.